What I'd like to start with, of course, is showing that all of the equipment you see in the Apollo photographs are simply mock-ups of pieces of equipment, and they weren't just prepared just for a simulation to fake it. They couldn't even be bothered to do that. The stuff that they were practicing with over the years is the same equipment you see in the Apollo photographs. This stuff is just worn out, beat up, rusted, molded, and everything you can imagine in these photographs. Many people say, oh, can you prove that this stuff, worn out pieces of whatever, right? And I mean, all of this equipment, of course, was prepared in a clean room, loaded on top of the Saturn V rocket, and so-called went to the moon. And when they took it out in its pristine condition, you can see that it's aged, cracked, completely worn out here. That's just one example. You can see it's all curling up on the edges and everything else here, right around everything.
Would a skeptic say, oh, well, that's because it, spent all that time flying to the moon and, all the G-force and everything that was doing?
Oil out and set it on your barbecue, and 5 minutes later you took a photograph of it. It looked pretty pristine. This is just absolutely bleached with the sun, cracked right back. You can see it's all cracked back. Just been out there for age. They were using it to practice with. They never even bothered to replace it with a new piece of equipment for the final simulation. This thing's been laying on its back forever. All the mud stuck to it across here. You can see the rust coming through. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying this is just stuff they were practicing with. And as you come down there, of course, when you look at the bottom, this, of course, is styrofoam. And of course, you can go online anywhere and look at what happens to styrofoam if you put it in a vacuum chamber. But you can see that it's just stuff that they were practicing with. You'd think with the budget they had that they would at least make an effort to work a little harder on the equipment. There's a couple of really fuzzy little photographs here, and this is rather difficult to see, but you can see this is part of a spacesuit, and this is part of a strut right there. There's a strut there. This is the secondary strut, and this spacesuit is on top of it. And now when you take a closer look, I'm going to show you right in here. There it is laying. There's the spacesuit. That's where the helmet attaches on the thing. It's laying over top of the strut. If it's laying on top of the strut, somebody took it off. They're probably taking a break, having lunch or something. They took the suit off, threw it over top of the strut, and they're having lunch. This is just laying on top of the secondary strut.
It does look like, for example, you could see very clearly the lunar surface, which indicates that the photograph is the right way up. I mean, there's no point in the entire Apollo missions I've ever seen them lying down. They fell over a couple of times.
That's the foil of the secondary strut, and the suit is just laying over it. The suit is not being worn, which means the astronaut is not in a suit. They didn't have an extra suit to lay one down, so it's got to be the suit that he was wearing that he took off. And he can't be on the lunar surface and not in a suit.
Well, according to Mary Bennett and David Percy, there were individuals working on this hoax who deliberately made it shoddy in several different ways. They deliberately produced low-quality material in order to alert people, maybe meant several generations ahead when history had moved on, people like us, in other words, to the fact that what they were producing was not real. Do you think that's possible, Scott?
I think they were so focused on trying to get that rocket off the ground for the show there, they weren't really concerned with it. If you watch that little video clip, it's going to give you an insight into the attitude and characters of the astronauts themselves. Mm-hmm. You can't fire these guys. They're household names worldwide. And you'll see that in the video, that you will not be able to control these guys. They were highly intelligent. They had a lot of fun. They had 3 of their very close personal friends die. You try and stop them. You can't threaten these guys. You can't do anything. I imagine they couldn't even get these guys to behave enough to pull off Apollo 13, so they had to make something else up. So they probably couldn't film it. Once you watch that video of them on the Apollo 12 and the messing around that they're doing there, try and put these guys in. I mean, Alan Bean put all of those comments in the cue cards as well. It's just unbelievable. This particular shot here, just to show you just how fake it is, just an old piece of particle board, call it a solar panel, probably a countertop, and it was glued down onto something else, and they pulled it up.
So there were photographs from Apollo 12, but it's interesting there was no TV footage, unlike 11, where it was televised. It was this unique experience live from the moon. Apollo 12 was not televised. There was no motion pictures because apparently the TV camera broke down. I mean, there's a whole story behind that.
Just the color TV camera. Like, they didn't even take time. This equipment is simply mock-ups of what it should have looked like that they were going to send to the moon. This stuff here, there's not even any time, energy, or anything into it. It was the stuff that they just put together. Farouk Al-Bez, he was the time management specialist. So he needed to know how long it would take to get the equipment out and how to set it up. So they make all this mock-up equipment, so at least they have something to work with. So they make a lightweight suit for them to work in, because on Earth, you can't wear a 180-pound suit. So you need to make a lightweight suit, so at least you had something to work with to give you an idea what it would take and what the timeline it's going to take to set this equipment up. But it's not the real equipment.
Have you ever been to either the Science Museum in London or, Kennedy Space Center in America and tried their actual moon gloves? Have you ever done that?
No.
I have. In London, in the Science Museum, there's a I don't know if it's, I think it's just a mock-up of the lunar lander, and they've actually got like actual moon gloves in like a tank area. So you put your hands in, and there's tasks to do, like getting some nuts and bolts and kind of putting them together. And on the ends of the gloves, they've got kind of quite hard, kind of like domes that go over the fingers and thumbs.
Yeah.
And it's near damn impossible to do anything in those gloves. And it even says, imagine being an astronaut and having to do kind of quite delicate tasks. Imagine how hard that would be.
They pressurized?
No, it wasn't a kind of environment, but they were kind of like either replica. I'm pretty sure they're replica gloves, but they're kind of quite thick and they're padded, and it's almost like one of those kind of like scientific chambers where you kind of handle things in a hazmat zone. And it's literally got like a little sign that says, imagine how hard it would be being an actual astronaut and having to do tasks wearing these gloves. And you'd think, yeah, it would be extremely hard. I'm kind of thinking now it would be actually impossible, because even if you're wearing gardening gloves, for instance, if you're wearing gardening gloves, you haven't got hard domed tips, so you can still kind of like feel things. You can still have like dexterity. But these particular gloves that they say are the moon gloves, you can't do anything. There's no dexterity, there's no intricacy. You could pick up a hammer and that's about it. You couldn't do things like twist kind of knobs or kind of screw things together. It's just impossible.
There's many different versions of the gloves out there now. That's like with all the documentation. I mean, they've upgraded that Surveyor a bunch of times, and now one of them is a high gain antenna instead of 2 solar panels. So they just make up whatever they want, whenever they want. And I have the documents showing that they're 2 solar panels.
Well, they certainly look like solar panels.
You're looking at the ability of the sun to reproduce itself and move a little bit here, because you've got a beautiful double shadow. What's happening in this photograph, you're going to see the shadow off to the left-hand side, and then in the next one, you see it. Now it's moved, it's up to the top, moved over a little bit, and then the third one, now it's off to the right.
Is that an actual real single shot from the moon, or supposedly from the moon?
Yes. You can pull this number up. It's magazine 659213. This is a series of 4 of them, and then of course it's back to the left-hand side again, and then they finally get it. It's fairly close. It's almost even when you get to 9215. Right?
So they were moving these spotlights around.
I don't know if they're moving the spotlights around, but how does the shadow move? You got to move the lights to make the shadow move. There's absolutely no other way around it. This particular photograph, this is one that will really show this machine was completely damaged. They actually dropped this thing on the Apollo 15 when they were doing it. The strap broke on it while they were trying to come in. It probably hooked one of the legs on the thing when they were setting it down on the gantry crane, and it literally broke the leg right off. That caused them to then do a stand-up EVA, then have a little nap, for 6 hours. That gave them a good 20 hours of time for them to work on it. And then the first thing they did, they jumped on the rover and they took off. First thing you're going to do there is set up the experimental equipment. If your time was cut short, at least it would be there. That would be your priority, would be set it up. But they didn't do that. They went out for a full EVA for close to 8 hours. On the second time, they didn't go out, they didn't set up the experimental equipment, they didn't even set the flag up. And if you're a good American, the first thing you are going to do is set the flag up, right? And salute it, that kind of stuff. Even after the second EVA, they just went out for 6.5 hours. Then they came back and so-called set it up. But by the time they got back there, the stagehands had already set up the experimental equipment, and they get a little shot of them with the flag. They couldn't show an outside shot anywhere around this machine because the legs were broken right off on the thing. And if you look on the left-hand side, this one's still, it's broken right off the thing, yet it's sitting on the outside edge of the pad. This leg is 32 inches from the secondary strut down. This one's quite a bit longer coming down. This is the strut that they replaced right on this side, and it's a good foot longer. And they can only get shorter. They can't get longer. And then you have, right in here, you have the little ball joint. That piece broke right off. And there's the two broken ball joints laying on the ground that they had to replace. But, like I said, why would they leave them laying on the ground? See this foam sitting here, this pink foam? Sitting up here?
Yeah.
It goes up in here. Okay, and they just cover it with Mylar just to give the vehicle some structure. Now, when you get to Apollo 16, this same stuff is still laying on the ground. You get to Apollo 17, the same stuff is still laying on the ground. They didn't clean it up between sets.
So these other missions have exactly the same appearance. They have the same objects around.
They just left this junk laying down. They might have re-raked the set and changed the background scenes and stuff, but they basically dropped it down in about the same spot. I don't think they moved that big gantry crane too far when they were doing it. Apollo 12, they show them loading this down, but part of this stuff right here is part of the support structure on it. When it hit the ground, when this thing hit the ground, when it fell, and you'll see it in the landing of Apollo 15, right? You can actually see this leg break right off in the video on it. The rover was snapped right off completely, and this thing is broken down because this is the other piece of it here. This round hoop here, this all belongs to here. And the only thing you'll see it is in this position in 16 and 17. You'll never see it in its upright position because it's all broken apart. This is where the rover was attached, right there. Those are the legs laying down. There's the thing when it hit the ground, it actually crumpled the exhaust bell housing. And that's just a piece of aluminum. Titanium won't wrinkle like that. Titanium is very brittle. It would just snap. But these things, you can see right here, you can see that they're just shredded right off, and there's where they should have been attached on the cables. These are the lowering control arms, snapped right off. When the thing hit the ground, it did that. It's in the photographs. It's the best they could clean it up. I mean, when you think about it, why would they have to do 2 EVAs with the rover to get away? And the rover was damaged. NASA claims that one of the batteries didn't work. It was 4-wheel steering and the front wheel steering didn't function. But on the second EVA, it got working again because they apparently parked it in the shade and it came back to life again.
Marcus, I've got a photograph question for you. Could we go back to that image, Scott? Marcus, what's your thoughts on that kind of like that red glow at the bottom? Would that happen on the moon, or what's going on there? Can you describe?
What looks like a red glow is actually a shadow. It's the shadow of the craft. You can see where it's directly illuminated. Obviously, it's a color film they were using, and it appears that the color balance has been completely destroyed because it shouldn't show red; it should show black.
Let me show you the original. NASA color enhanced this, by the way, to brighten it up on there.
Well, seeing as it's not on the moon, if it was, the film wouldn't have worked.
There's the original.
Okay.
It says adjusted JPEG. And I don't know why they wanted to brighten that up.
One other thing, Scott, could you have a zoom in on the gloves? In the chat box, I've actually found the gloves that they've got in the Science Museum that you can actually put your hands in, and you'll see exactly what I mean by the hard kind of domes on the fingers.
Those are Apollo gloves because they all have those little blue polyurethane thimble type things on the end.
There's a variety version of them. This looks like it's supposed to be from Apollo 11 because they didn't use the cup checklist. It was the instructions that they have were stitched on in Apollo 11.
I want to know how on earth you can do anything with those on your fingers.
Well, you can't.
I would like people listening at home to get themselves some gardening gloves, cut the fingertips off, get some ping pong balls, cut those in half, tape on the ping pong balls, and then just try and do normal stuff at home, like, you know, opening the oven and putting food in, or getting your keys out, opening a car.
There's Neil's official left-hand glove.
How can you do anything? How can you operate tools? How can you grip things? How can you twist knobs and dials and unscrew things?
Would that be an outer glove that goes over something that's on the inside, like a inner glove or something?
There it is right there.
I
There's
see,
the whole thing, rubber bladder inside where the ring attaches down underneath. The thing is, they have these on display in the museum. These are so-called Neil's official gloves. But Neil's gloves were left on the LEM and it so-called went back and crashed on the lunar surface. They took them off to save weight.
They don't even look dirty, do they, really? The moon dust or anything.
Well, they would have to be reproductions. They couldn't be the originals because he so-called didn't bring them back.
Yeah.
You see it? There's Neil Armstrong. There's the actual...
Made in Taiwan.
April 1969, and ILC, International Latex Corporation Industries, that's same people who make bras, so used to it.
There's the contract numbers right there on it. Serial number is 073. So they made at least 73 of them for him.
Marcus, look at those gloves. Would you be able to operate a Hasselblad camera wearing those gloves?
No, because you couldn't feel where the shutter was. Because on the Hasselblad that allegedly used on the moon, the shutter is on the front of a Hasselblad. They made a big 1-inch square shutter button, which is fair enough, but you still got to feel where your finger is. And you only use one finger to press the shutter.
There's their instructions. These are the detailed instructions on how to do everything on the lunar surface while they were there.
I would like to know how those gloves can operate that camera.
Also, the writing on those sleeves look incredibly small if you're in a spacesuit as well, in the glare of the sun.
On the front of the Hasselblad, you see the big square shutter button, and that's what you've got to find and press to take a photograph. The film is wound on automatically. It's the only automatic feature on the camera. That button on the right-hand side is for changing the lens. You press it in and it releases the lens. And on top of the lens, you'll see the little paddles on the right-hand side, on the left here. That's what was put on by Hasselblad to enable somebody wearing gloves to use the lens. But you can't see these indicators from inside your helmet. The first one is the aperture, the second one is the shutter speed, and the back one here is the focusing. But if you can't see it, how do you know you've got it correctly focused? Well, you don't, which is why I say that. And anyway, the film wouldn't have worked because it would have been destroyed in the vacuum. As I've said before, it's a brilliantly executed propaganda exercise.
These cameras aren't accurate because they don't have the trigger on them.
Oh, that's right. Pistol grip, which mounts under the camera and under here. And that's visible on the Apollo 12 photographs of Al Bean. You can see his pistol grip. Now, quite why they put a pistol grip on.
This one's a different camera as well because it says 70 total exposures, right? And they were shooting 150, right?
On the Hasselblad, which has got the magazine on the back, you can see on the back here, that's the magazine. That holds 150 black and white exposures. I think it's 120 color, because color film is obviously slightly thicker, because it's got more than one emulsion layer. The black and white film's only got the one emulsion layer. So it can fit into this magazine, which is about the size of the camera body itself. So 70 would refer to the size of the film, same as an IMAX film, 70 millimeter.
Right, but this particular one says 70 total exposures.
But yeah, it does say 70 total exposure, so it must be, that's a standard kind of Hasselblad for non-NASA users, I guess, for professional photographers, I'd imagine.
70 millimeter film, or 120, which is what it used to be called, 120 film, 120 millimeter, that had a paper backing in it. So if you take the paper backing away, you can get in double the number of film, double exposure. That's probably what it means by 70.
Yeah, well, like I said, when they're putting photographs up of stuff and claiming them that they're associated with Apollo or they're part of Apollo, right? There's so much stuff that just isn't anymore.
Well, I can imagine on Earth that wouldn't be a bad camera to use because the thing is, if you're going to take a photograph, you've got to be able to hear the shutter click at the start. And as Marcus explained, when you're in your spacesuit, if you've got it attached to the chest bracket, which a lot of the astronauts did most of the time because they needed their hands free to manipulate things as best they could with those gloves, you wouldn't actually be able to see what you were doing. You wouldn't be able to feel what you were doing because you can't feel anything with those gloves. But of course, if they're pressurized, they're going to be even stiffer and more and less malleable than they would be if they weren't pressurized. And you wouldn't be able to hear the shutter click. You wouldn't be able to see what your hands were doing. You wouldn't even know if you'd taken a photograph or not. You wouldn't be able to hear the clicking as it wound on.
Maybe that's why they had to have so many missions, because they had to go and get all the photographs done correctly. It's like Stanley Kubrick. You only shoot on location to get it right.
The problem that NASA has with it is they've had equipment on display for the last 50 years. And here's a prime example. Here's the boot, the inner liner boot that is supposed to seal. And now take a look at these zippers. They don't seal anything. What I'm saying is the suits that they had to modify to make a lightweight suit to practice in is the actual suit that they put on display. Now they have versions of the PLSS, right, with all the equipment inside of it. That PLSS weighs 140 pounds. The suit weighs another 40 pounds on top of that for a total of 180 pounds. You couldn't possibly practice on Earth with it. So they made very, very lightweight suits, except those are the suits they faked the moon landing with, and that's the same suit that they put on display. Here's an example of it. It doesn't seal. You're not going anywhere if these boots don't seal. They claim they had the best people doing the stitch work. I don't see any quality stitch work here.
Is that actually meant to be a vacuum seal, that zip?
This is the inner liner boot.
You can't seal it. Zips, even rainwater goes through a zip. How do you make a zip that works to keep a vacuum?
How do they do it for spacewalks then? I mean, how do they seal it for spacewalks?
That's a whole different rig if you're talking about Columbia or the space shuttle and stuff like that, right? When you're looking at this is the equipment that is on display.
The astronauts that go on the ISS and do their external spacewalks, do we know how those are actually sealed? What the process is?
They're using a hard shell upper body to start with on those. Take a look at this. You see, does that look sealed? That piece comes in and there has a harness inside, and the steel ring comes out, and that's where they put the tether straps on because they were standing up while they were landing. That's to hold them in place. It goes right through the suit, and it's not sealed. They never thought that anybody would look at it. It's on display. And when you look at these, see, that's just like a door latch. They don't compress. The pressure is on the inside of the suit pushing out, so it's pushing away from this is a rubber seal, which wouldn't work either. You need to have metal. But the helmet would be pushing out against these clips if it was pressurized inside. These were designed on a practice suit so you could quickly take the helmet on and off, take the gloves on and off very, very quickly. The practice suit also has a P-flap on the front of it, right there. Because you're not going to jump out of the suit when you're practicing. Right? You can see how far these rings come in. If they really worked on them, they could get them up there to work on the thing, but they never had them connected all the time. They'd be taking them off, first of all, to handle stuff, and second, to cool themselves down. This particular suit, this Armstrong suit, this is the lightweight version that they created so they could practice with. This is not a functioning suit.
Yeah, and it's going to cost $500,000 to renovate it, apparently.
It's even more than that. They did Cernan's suit as well. Cernan's suit is apparently, after he died, they found the abrasion cover from the PLSS in his closet, and they've taken it back and it's going to be put up on display. Well, the problem is in the photographs, before they leave, the PLSs are sitting there with the abrasion covers on them.
Yeah, because all astronauts took their suits off, chucked them out the door before they took off.
They chucked them out, yeah. So to do that, to keep the door open, they had to go on to an umbilical.
That's right.
This is the abrasion cover that they claimed that Cernan, that they found it in his closet, that he had brought it back with him. Now he is on an umbilical cord because this thing's on the ground. So he's in the LEM on an umbilical cord. He can't go back out and get this thing to bring it back with him. Yet they claim that it was brought back. Now, if you take a little closer look at this thing, you can see that they didn't even bother to give them brand new bloody practice suits. This thing is worn right through, right there. There's a hole right through the abrasion cover, completely worn out, riding around on the rover. Nobody's going back out to get them. And yet they claim that one was brought back.
So yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it? I mean,
there's the two of them are in these two shots here. Right under there beside the shadow. And you see it in this one. That's it down there on that side.
In fact, NASA were very keen to tell us that after they chucked their PLSS packs out, the seismometer, or the earthquake detector, recorded it. So they were very
exactly,
which of course indicates that they were on the moon to chuck them out. Yet another of those fake news information.
Another thing to show that they were simply doing a mock-up, and this is one of the most famous photographs, okay, of them coming out on a thing, and there's all kinds of lighting anomalies and everything else, because like if they're even saying it's reflecting from the ground, right, this egress coming out is covering all of that, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to just zoom right in on Mr. Buzz Aldrin here, and I want you to take a look at the suit. The PLS is touching the top edge of the door. You can see it's touching the door. You can see the angle that he's sitting in. You can see the position and the angle that he's actually sitting in. And if you recall, Buzz saying, we better not close this door because there's no handle on it. Well, that's because it's a mock-up. We're going to have a little look at the inside. And this is going to show you right away that this was just a cheap little rendition. This console right here, there's the door. He cannot be in that position right there. That's 14 inches in. The entire console is there. That means that this is just simply a shell, because he cannot be sitting up in that position. That's halfway down the PLSS, sticking straight up. There's only an inch between the top of that door and this console sticking out that far. None of this is inside this machine here. Just a mock-up. It can't be there. He can't be in this position right here.
That's true, because you can measure the average individual from their knees up to about halfway up their back, and it would be greater than the distance, because that door measures 30 inches square. And there is no way you could kneel like that. Presumably that's what he's doing, kneeling. The average length of a human from their knee to their hip is about 2 feet. So you've got another foot of PLSS above that. And it doesn't look as if he's particularly uncomfortable there.
It can't be touching the door there. The PLS can't go up into here. If this equipment was here,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be. So if this equipment is missing, they can't fly this thing.
They certainly couldn't have landed it either, because Armstrong did it manually, we're told, using all those dials and knobs with his spacesuit on.
That's right. That's why the mock-up, they forgot to put a door handle on it, probably to give them more space, there wouldn't be anything inside of this shell. If that console isn't there, there wouldn't be anything inside of the shell for them. You see it when you pull back a little bit, you can just see that angle even clearer. There's no way it's coming up against that.